Welcome everyone to episode 22 of the Morgan Horse Source. I am here with our guest Shawna Karrassch. I have this little introduction ready. So Shawna Karrassch is a horse trainer that specializes in utilizing positive reinforcement and bridge conditioning. Shawna originally got her start in animal training with marine mammals such as dolphins, sea lions, and orcas. Because of the nature of these animals, only positive reinforcement methods would work to have these animals participate voluntarily with their trainers. Therefore, it gave her unique experience with this type of training and notably without any use of pressure on the animals. When Shawna was introduced to top equestrian competition, she saw immediately how reward-based training could be used to engage the horse's willingness in the equestrian activities. Shawna has been a pioneer in bringing positive reinforcement training into the forefront of the equestrian industry and has already dedicated more than 26 years helping horse trainers, owners, and enthusiasts with her eye-opening humane behavioral training techniques. She has traveled worldwide and has even worked with Olympian BZ Madden and several top-level and Olympic-level horses at the prestigious Madden Farm. Thank you for joining us, Shawna.
Hi, it is great to be here and it's nice to see you. And I'm just happy to be here spreading the word and supporting what you're doing because you're doing such amazing things and spreading the word. So it's nice to be here.
Yes. Well, thank you. I'll go ahead with the first questions.
Okay.
My first question would be if you could explain to everybody what is positive reinforcement.
Okay, and I think that's a good question because a lot of people really don't really know because it's a scientific term. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm great with my horse. That's, I think we all have that intent, but positive reinforcement is actually a systematic approach to utilizing things that they value to create to create behavior. So let's kind of back up for a minute. So we have positive reinforcement means we have negative reinforcement. Clearly, that's kind of the juxtaposition there. And so many people, when I first started teaching this, decades ago to the horse world, if I would talk about negative reinforcement, people would kind of get their dander up, they were like, no, I don't use it. It'll be 2 hours into a clinic and they're still saying, I don't do negative reinforcement. But really, because what people seemed to me that they thought back in those days was they kind of had a social definition. So instead of being like it was written by scientists, it's written by mathematicians. So negative reinforcement is like a negative number. It is simply something that is subtracted from the equation. Meanwhile, positive reinforcement means something added to the equation. So like a negative and positive number weren't good and bad. They were just one was added and one was subtracted. So people would kind of get that. I mean, really, this is what people seem to think. If you use negative reinforcement, you beat your horse. And if you're positive reinforcement, you didn't beat your horse. And that's not really how it was written. So positive reinforcement means that a reinforcer increases the frequency of behavior. So clearly we increase the frequency of behavior with both methods. So we see that happening all the time. We teach our horses a canter depart or loading in the trailer or standing for injections. We increase the frequency of the behavior. So we are using reinforcers, but it's the method that we go about it. Are we using something that they like, something that they want, something that's considered what's called in scientific terms an appetitive? Or are we using something that they want to go away? They want to be subtracted. They want to have it removed from the equation. So we are always using reinforcers, but is it something they want or something they want to go away is really kind of the way that you would figure out what is the motivation, what is the impetus behind the behavior. So positive reinforcement is not historically been done. So this is really the new part of the equation, because we've always, there's plenty about removal reinforcement or negative reinforcement because that's traditional horse training. So think about it. With traditional horse training, if you want your horse to go forward, what do? You squeeze with your legs. I mean, and then when they're good, we remove that pressure. So they're working for that pressure to be released. So it's pressure and release. We want them to stop or slow down. We apply pressure on the halter or the bit or the reins, whatever it might be. Again, they're looking for that pressure to go away. That is traditional training. That is natural horsemanship training. And so positive reinforcement is a part that hasn't historically been done. And really, we tend to use what is one of the most valuable things to horses is we tend to utilize food in the positive reinforcement. That's what we used with the marine mammals, but we didn't use it in a way that this is where people get hung up. They think it's just kind of throwing food at them, and it's not. As you know, it's a systematic approach. How do you build up a good mental state with it, and them enjoying it and liking it and understanding it and bringing clarity and putting something in it for the horse, and then how do we begin to fade those pieces? So so it's a little more complicated than just feeding them.
Yeah, perfect. With that being said, what is clicker training and what is the significance of the clicker?
Okay, and that's a good question, because positive reinforcement training and clicker training really are going to be the same thing, but the clicker training is a term that so many more people are used to by now. They've heard it through the dog community is really where, the positive reinforcement training and the use of a bridge signal, which I'll get to that in a second, it's really started with the marine mammals. So the marine mammal community is really the first place that we took it out of the textbooks and put it into a broad application. So really that's where it kind of got developed into this systematic approach. So it was studied and it was used by, there's some people that used it for kind of some smaller level things, like one person, Bob Bailey and Breedley Bailey, they used it for like CIA pigeons that were trained for pecking and all kinds of things. But really it was a marine mammal community that took it and put it into that practical application, into the big broad sense. So we didn't tend to use clickers with the marine mammals. We tend to use high-pitched whistles or even a verbal bridge signal. But so the clicker was really clicker training. That term really came from the dog community, which got around to positive reinforcement much after it's relatively new in the dog world even. So it's the dog world is probably, they were where the horse world is now. So when I first was looking into horses, it was new to the dog world, and now it's become much more understood. So, but the clicker is what we call a bridge signal. So it's called the bridge signal because it bridges the moment from which the animal does something right, like the dolphin doing a bow across a pool. And it tells them that, yes, what you just did is correct. Now come to me for some sort of reward. So that's a bridge signal. It can be a clicker. It can be a high-pitched whistle. It can be all sorts of things. You can use verbal bridge signals, tactile bridge signals. You can even, there's one person that went to the Olympics and that I worked with, and she was a dressage rider, and you can't talk. So this was her bridge signal. So all she did was clear her throat. So your bridge signal can be anything under the sun, but the clicker I find is a great tool for the horses. And because it's loud, it can be heard across across a field, across a paddock, over a jump, over a canter, over a gallop, the noise, it just can cut through that. So it's very loud and distinct. And I think it's very effective tool or bridge signal for the horses. But so what it does, it really tells them, yes, what you've just done just now is correct, and you've earned some sort of reward. And one of the things, and you know this, Amelia, is I can't imagine training without a bridge signal, because if you don't know, if you're just feeding, what are you feeding? You don't necessarily know. But when you have a bridge signal to say, yes, that bow over there, yes, that canter depart, yes, that flying change, you can say that piece right there. You can't feed at that moment in time, but you can click at that moment in time or blow your whistle. So it's a way to say, yes, that particular piece. So it's like a scalpel, it brings so much clarity, and it makes it very, very clear the piece that we're looking for. So it is a fabulous tool. And think about this is an example that I think of a lot. Is there was a woman that was one time in a barn, and I came there to do a clinic, and so it was the day before, and she said, I'm really glad you're here because I'm teaching my little filly to lift her leg, to hold her leg up. So it's a young little horse learning to have her feet picked. And she said, but it's almost like she's pulling her foot out of my hand and putting it back on the ground. So I said, okay, well, what, or do you have a bridge signal of any clicker or anything like that? No, I'm just feeding. Okay, so when are you feeding? I'm feeding as soon as I'm done. And I said, okay, so where's her foot when you're feeding? And you could see it dawn on her then. She's like, it's on the ground, so while she thinks I'm feeding for the foot being up, the little horse is thinking, soon as my foot's on the ground, I get fed. So let's get my foot on the ground. So she really was pulling her foot out of her hand. But by putting a bridge signal in there, a clicker or whatever you want it to be, she had a way to communicate that piece is what I like. Even though she'd still get fed at the same place, she marked that moment in time, which then made that a significant and memorable moment. So it's really quite useful. Kind of criminal how
pretty important. Yes. Yes. I actually use that story to when I'm telling people about the bridge signal with the foot.
That's good. Because I think they can relate to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People go, yeah, I'm just going to use food. And I think what people forget too is every single time you feed your horse, you are reinforcing a behavior. So we've all heard, that people say, don't hand feed horses. You can't hand feed horses. You'll spoil them. You'll get, well, really, you all it shows to me is how important food is to them. So if we do arbitrarily feed the wrong thing, which we do all the time when we're not aware of the systematic approach behind it, we can be feeding the wrong things, but we've fed it. It's just our lack of awareness that didn't realize that, yeah, he was reaching over the gate pretty hard and I fed him. And then the gate's gone. The horse is like, I'm all over you. And they don't realize they've been feeding that for, 10 years or whatever it is. So it's really, to me, it just speaks how powerful food actually is and how much we can benefit by recognizing it and then figuring out how do we use it in an effective way.
Yes, that's a very good point. All right. So how is positive reinforcement or clicker training different from traditional training or negative reinforcement or even popular training methods like natural horsemanship or Pirelli?
Okay, I think, and that's a really good question because it's all based in operant conditioning. Okay, this is that behavior geek in me. It's all based in operant conditioning, and operant conditioning basically is we're teaching them to operate on their environment. We're teaching them that there's consequences. You do this, you get this. You do this, you get this. So it happens from the second a horse is born. They get air. And then pretty quick, they start trying to stand up and figure out how to stand up, and they fall down, they stand up, and they realize if I lean more on my back, whatever it is, they're trying to figure out, how do I stand? And so it's already in them to know this is one of the values of food is they are hardwired looking for food. So from the moment they're born, they start standing and trying to figure out, how do I get food? But you watch that process, it's operant conditioning. It's full of them figuring out, oh, I'm falling down. How do I work it out? So operant conditioning is going on all the time. And so it's really the consequences related to the things they do. Do they get the thing they want, or do they avoid the thing they don't want? So really, when we think about natural horsemanship and traditional training, it really is based on the thing they don't want. It's when they're good, we don't. And this is one of the things that BZ Madden, she said it on that first video we made. She said that what she loves about positive reinforcement is we finally have a way to tell the horse yes. She said, because all we've done so far, we leave them alone when they've done it right. So there's not really something in it that's salient, something that's valuable to them. So by putting something in it that they value, it becomes a pretty big game changer, because now there's something in it for the horse, something that they value. And then they become invested in the training and the outcome of the training because they want it, they like it, they're desiring it. Versus just being like, okay, I want that to go away. I want that to stop. And then being left alone when they find the right answer. So it does a 180 on it is the game changer. But really, I think one of the biggest things that I think is so important behind positive reinforcement that we're learning more about all the time, and that is the neuroscience. This is how their brains work. This is how our brains work, horses' brains work, pigeons' brains work. It's just, we're learning more about it. And now behavioral science has been considered a soft science forever. It's only in the past decade or so that really we're starting to become aware of neurobiology and the neuroscience coming up behind it and really telling us what's going on in the brain. So now we can learn things like what part of the brain is being used, when do endorphins raise, when does dopamine spike, how does. So we're starting to get this hard science that comes in and can prove and show us what's going on. And one of the big things they found, it was particularly, there was one scientist named Jaak Panksepp, and it's JAAKPANKSEPP. And he was one of the neurobiologists. There's many there, but he was a good one that really studied different parts of the brain. And one of the things that they've discovered is that when we use traditional training, it tends to light up, or pressure and release, negative reinforcement, tends to light up a part of the brain that is responsible for fight or flight. So that part of the brain gets lit up. And when we use positive reinforcement, it tends to light up a different part of the brain, a part of the brain that they've referred to as the seeking system, that neuroscientists have called the seeking system. So that's the things they want, things they like, things they desire. But what's really significant about it, it's not just as using different parts of the brain, but those two different parts of the brain also produce chemicals. And those chemicals result in things like in the part of the brain that's responsible for fight or flight. The chemicals that are produced there result in stress hormones like cortisol. Cortisol is produced in that part of the brain. So we activate that part of the brain, we activate cortisol and the release of cortisol into their system. When we activate the seeking system, on the other hand, it tends to produce endorphins and dopamines. Those are the chemicals that are produced in that part of the brain. So then what we do have, the result is now we have endorphins and dopamines coursing through their systems. That right there is a huge outcome, because it now has emotional ties. And when they repeat a behavior that they've learned, the emotions that are part of it, which has a lot to do with those chemicals that are part of it, tend to come forward every time they repeat that behavior. So if they see a trailer and they think, oh, I better get in the trailer or lest I get in trouble, it's, cortisol is starting. And now they're kind of feeling like this about it, but they'll do it. But, now they're not feeling great about it, but they will do it, or else is kind of how it must feel to them. But when it's positive reinforcement, they're like, oh, the trailer, I love the trailer. And now it's endorphins and dopamines and an opportunity for good things to happen. And that makes a huge difference. One of the things when I first started with John and BZ, it was that I didn't even start with them yet. I went there to figure out, should we, because John Madden heard about the positive, we talked about it over dinner, and he said, you must come to New York. Let's do this. Let's put this into action. And, and there's some stories with that. But at the end of the first week, all I did was 3 5-minute sessions a day in their stall with the clicker for 3 days. And then 3 5-minute sessions a day in their stall with the target for 3 days. So they saw me for a total of 15 minutes a day for 6 days. Now they were turned out, they were ridden, they were groomed, they're on the walker, they did their normal things. I only caught them when they're in their stalls, when I went in there and thought I'm going to do another session. And at the end of the week, and BZ's not like a real chatty, superfluous person about what she says. And she said, each of those horses you're working, because they picked certain horses for me, each of those horses you're working is remarkably better in the ring. And I didn't really know what to make of that, because that was, I didn't know what that was about. I was like, huh. But I was like, yay, what do you say? But now with the advances of neurobiology, I recognize now what it was. It is now, as they started, I used to say it's because I'd see it over and over and over and over and over for years and years and years. I'd say, I don't have to tell you people, but it's like they're in love. And I said, I don't, it's just what it seems like. I don't know what to say. And then as we figure it out, what happens when you're newly in love? It's endorphins and dopamines coursing through your system, and everything is softer and easier and brighter and happier. And so indeed, that's really what was going on, was the endorphins and dopamine were now affecting their performance in the ring. So from there on out, John's like, you teach them anything you want. I don't care, because they're better in the ring. They're better athletes. They're better competitors. But also the horses are happier in a better place too. So it's a win-win all the way around, literally.
Yes. Awesome. All right. What inspired you to start training with horses?
Okay, that was, I didn't do horses as a kid. And it's, I was sexually abused as a kid. So that's part of my history. But it was significant, because when I was about 6 years old, it started when I was really, really young. And when I was about 6 years old, we had a farm. My granddad had a hobby farm, because he was busy in the city, but he liked his horses, and he was very rarely there because he stayed busy. But we would go see the horses. And when I was about 6 years old, I remember seeing the horses, and I recognized that they were not, when we went to go catch them, they lived in big, in fields. So we had to go get in the car and round them up. And when I was about 6, I realized they don't want to be caught. I didn't know the words. I didn't know the whole big picture, but I felt like we were imposing ourselves on them. And that to me was very uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be a part of it. So I pushed away and said, I don't want anybody catching the horses for me anymore. They don't really want to do this. But they were what everybody calls good horses, because they were so safe. Like, us children could hang on their legs and they didn't bat an eye. But I realized as I grew into an adult that what I was in with the abuse, I was in a state of learned helplessness. I had no control. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't change it. And really, that's what I was recognizing and seeing in the horses, was that they were in a state of learned helplessness. And so it just resonated with me that I didn't want to do that. I did not know I saw me in the horses. But so I pushed away. But then as an adult, I said, now I'm a marine mammal trainer. I love the horses. That was not the thing. It's not like I didn't like the horses. I just didn't want to do that to them. And so as I grew up studying, doing, wanted to do field research, and then got into the behavior. And then Elizabeth Bushburk of Anheuser-Busch gave some of us trainers tickets to go see a show jumping Grand Prix in San Diego, where I was from. So I went, and when I watched that Grand Prix, I was like, and everybody else at the end of the night was like, whatever, bye, see you tomorrow. And I was kind of like, and I thought, I want to do this. And what I knew now, I knew I had a different way to interact with the horses. I knew that it wouldn't result in the horses that I knew. I didn't know enough about how horses were trained, though, honestly, to be a little naive. And I'm going to also say, I watched those horses. Most of those horses and riders looked stressed. It didn't look fun for the horse. I didn't think they were not engaging at all, but there were 2 horse and rider combinations. It was like a walk in the park. The horses looked free and happy and relaxed, and they were just jumping over it. And the people, that it was just, so those 2, I was like, that particularly is what I want. So that's where I first started looking into it. And I started, asking. So I had access to Grand Prix show jumping. So I go home that night and I'm like, I want to do this. I don't know what posting a trot is. So, I clearly had a ways to go. But when I got home, I had access to Grand Prix show jumpers. So I started saying, hey, what kind of training do you do? I started asking, and do you use food? Do you use positive reinforcement? Now, I knew about traditional training and negative reinforcement from textbooks, because when I was at SeaWorld, we had university textbooks, and we were tested on them. So I knew the science inside and out, but I'd never done, negative reinforcement. I'd never done pressure release. So I didn't really know it from a practical place. I knew it from an academic place. So I kept asking people, well, people said, no, horses aren't smart enough. That's not how that's done. They don't learn like that. They, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't know. I've seen target trained, sharks, goldfish, meerkats, hippos, rhinos, lions, tigers, giraffes, camels with my own eyes. So I'm like, I don't understand that. I don't think horses would that be that challenging, but what do I know? I haven't done it. So I started looking into it, but I kept hearing no, no, no. And then finally there was a man that I saw this little article about, and it was in People magazine, just like a little paragraph. And his name was Tom Dorrance. And if you don't know if you know who Tom Dorrance is, he is big time in the natural horsemanship movement. He's like the grandfather of the natural horsemanship movement. All of the people, the Buck Brenmans, Pat Pirellis, all of them look to Tom and Bill Dorrance as their icons. Well, I saw this blurb, so I thought, well, he sounds different. So I just called him on the phone. And, and this was before the internet. I talked to him. I got his assistant. And then, I talked to him on the phone and I said, hey, I'm a marine mammal trainer and we use food and I would like to do it with horses. And he said, absolutely, you should try it with horses. And it turns out, so he was really the big one that gave me the go ahead, that gave me kind of the thumbs up to give it a whirl. And it turns out, and he was really nice. And he sent me a signed book. He even invited me to come to his ranch to put it into practice with him. And I was like, I'm busy. I got to work, hung up the phone thinking, who is this man? But now I look back and kind of go, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. But I didn't know that. But it is, and my talk with him is what got me, to move in that direction. Think, okay, then I'm taking lessons, because finally somebody had, was optimistic and was giving me kind of a better, hope to go do it. And it turned out he had actually used food in the training, but he didn't have to do it in the systematic approach. So what he would find is like, yes, the food is very powerful. I can get stuff done with food, but I don't know how to feed the food, so he got himself kind of stuck because he didn't know what the marine mammals trainers knew, and how to move beyond the food and how to create those good feelings and then move past it. So that was really where I got started. And then I had dinner with John Madden one night, which is Beezy Madden's husband. And you kind of heard about that part, and that's how we went. And it started from there. And that's where I kind of got my start, right at the top.
Yeah. Very special. But good. I mean,
yeah, it was. Yeah, it was, because it really pushed. We really kind of sunk in. How do we do it? How do we put this stuff together? How much of this? How much of that? How do we figure this out? And it was really, really powerful. I mean, and John and Beezy continued to do it. I mean, I've lost touch with them nowadays, but they continued to do it for a long time afterwards. Every horse who came through those doors got positive reinforcement when we were living there. And they went on to work with a horse named Judgment, who it was a really big show jumper, and he overcame his water issues, and that was a pretty big deal. So it was an awesome opportunity to work with such exceptional horse people.
Well, that makes a good transition to this next question of what were some of the things that you helped teach the Olympic horses you were working with? Were they all started from ground up with positive reinforcement, or was it just here and there?
Yeah, like it was definitely back then. There was no concept of starting a horse as a baby yet. Minty was a horse he was a thoroughbred that was bought by John as a yearling. He never raced, and he became the real horse who started off. He learned everything through positive reinforcement. But with the horses that Beezy had, they didn't really start brand new horses typically. They would go find young horses with talent and then bring them the rest of the way. And the thing about Beezy is she's not a confrontational personality, so she's not like, I'm going to make it do it. That's not, there's some people out there that do, but she's not one of those people. She would pick horses that already like their job, like what they did. They had the talent, and then she'd take them the rest of the way. So we had young horses, but they're typically already started. Most of them came from Europe. Some of them came from Argentina, so they had different backgrounds. So mostly we were adding the positive reinforcement into what they were already doing. But I must say they were already pretty well-adjusted horses. I really would watch those horses and think they enjoyed shows, they enjoyed their jumping, they enjoyed that. So I got to kind of see the best of it, because there are plenty of horses that I think are unhappy, and I don't think can be so smooth just to add the two together. Sometimes I think we need to back up and go, let's unpack this stuff a little better and build the confidence. One of the things I've learned with the horses, I've learned 50 times more with the horses than I even learned with the marine mammals. And I learned really solid science. I learned really solid technique. I learned how to get really high criteria. I learned how to make it fun for them. But what I've recognized with the horses, there's so much more. It's like a tip of an iceberg. And what we see above the water is the operant conditioning, teaching them to jump, teaching them to get in the trailer, teaching them to do those things. But really, what is really changing is this big giant iceberg that's underneath the water that you don't even see, where it starts to change their personalities. It starts to flood their systems with endorphins and dopamines. It changes relationships. It changes their perspective. Instead of being neophobic and worried about everything and thinking it's all scary and bad, because that's how horses tend to be. They tend to be neophobic. They start to look at things as more curious and interesting, so we get bolder, more confident horses. So it kind of transitions them to that place. So some of the horses, we worked on, Judgment had a really big issue with the water, open water, which is like 12, 15-foot water spread. So that was his big issue, and everybody knew he had a challenge. So that people, that was a great story and really brought a lot of raise the profile, positive reinforcement in that world. But there were some horses that, would rear if you asked them to back up. So, they came like that. So we'd work through that. Or John and Beezy, a horse that came to John and Beezy that was terrified of the riding stick. So you couldn't have it on the ground. You couldn't have it under saddle. Your neighbor couldn't have it. And that was the one thing. When we talked over dinner, John went home to that horse. I'd given him a clicker now because I had some left over from a marine mammal project. And he went and there was a horse that they had as afraid of the riding stick. And the very first day he called and said, I not only got this horse to touch the riding stick, I can't get him to stop. So if you could turn that big of a no into that big of a yes, let's start a business and let's do this. So those things were all over the map. Something like I remember one horse we worked with that when the grooms would take him to be turned out, on his way to being turned out, he would just start dragging him and going to the paddock, and he wouldn't stop. You tried to get his halter off and he was flying around. So we resolved that. We changed the emotions behind that. And so there was a number of things we worked on, but some horses really didn't get a whole lot beyond the bridge conditioning and target training, knowing that changed so much for them already, that now it rounded out so many edges, softened so many edges for them. So it was a little bit all over the map, I mean, it's anything. You can train a horse to do anything, really.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. What was it like being one of the first people to mainstream and show people the importance and effectiveness of positive reinforcement in the horse industry?
That was a long haul. I mean, it was a time where it was really important for me to maintain the belief in the positive reinforcement and know that it is good. But I'm going to say for decades, I'd say there's 2 decades probably because it was now 28 years ago. I'd say for 20 years, I had that really good start with John and Beezy. The first clinic we booked was for the United States Equestrian Team. I did another one in between there, but so we got kind of high profile, got to work with some significant people doing significant things. But by and large, it was a lot of sowing seeds, you just had to and people would be like really poo-pooing it. But if they would listen for 20 minutes, they'd kind of go, well, there's something to it. Okay, I get that. But you really had to continue to keep climbing up a hill, and that's people nowadays. You'll see people that are new to the positive reinforcement, and they're like, nobody's doing it. And I'm like, there's 12,000 people in that group, that do know it, so it was very, 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 very different back then. And I was an island, people would come, I would do expos. I did the equine affairs. I did all of them back then, and all the big expos and demos all over the place. And people would kind of come see me because I was the whale trainer. I think that was kind of like a novelty, it's kind of like a sideshow thing they'd come see. And then they'd walk away going, yeah, there's something to it. They weren't ready to do it, but you just had to keep going like that. So when people nowadays are, complaining that not enough people know it, I'm like, well, imagine when you're the only person, and there was no internet, we weren't really, there was the website, but not really, like it is nowadays. So it's very, very, very reinforcing now to see how much is going on, and to see people talking and having conversations and knowing what it is. And there, we still have a long way to go, but at least it's getting, this is what I feel like, it is exponentially growing. So, it's 2 and 4 and 6 and 8. And finally, it's just, really, really opening up, and it's more and more people all the time. And what's kind of fun now, being out there in the world again, because for a while I was working privately with people, but being out there in the world, and people say, yeah, I have, I saw you at Equine Affair 22 years ago, and that's how I got started. I had no idea. You know what I mean? I didn't really know the impact that I made back then. So it was, to see it now, you really get to be reinforced, and it comes back around. So it's very reinforcing, literally, for me. And it's nice to see it taking hold, and seeing people like you and people listening. You guys don't know this, I'm sure, but Amelia brought her mom and her sister to a clinic in Texas. And they came to my clinic, and she said, I want you guys to come see the positive reinforcement. And so she was really dragging them along, and I'm sure they're probably like, yeah, okay, Amelia, we'll go, kind of being a little, we're going because we're supporting her. And really, you and your mom have just taken off from here, particularly you and your mom, but all of you have taken off and really grabbed onto this and become influencers. And to see people like you doing that, and really understanding it, and reaching out and teaching more people and exposing more people and helping more horses through and making examples of it all, that is what is happening more and more and more. And it, like, I have chills right now, because it just makes me so happy and grateful to see, young people like you particularly out there, and you're going to continue, you're making ripples and you're making changes. And there's no words for it. It's amazing.
Wow. I really appreciate that. But yeah, you've been doing amazing work for a really long time now. It kind of sucks that I just now found you, but it was such a great thing. But
and it's great. And that's what is so joyous nowadays, is seeing and being able to sit back and just watch it grow, and watch you get people on board. And it's fabulous.
Yes, it is. All right. What are the main differences you see in horses that are trained with positive reinforcement versus without positive reinforcement?
Yeah, I think it's now, and I'm also going to say there's some horses that have been trained traditionally that have had really exceptional timing. So this is the thing about Beezy and her horses. She had such good timing that she was ridiculously good. And those horses, they had very clear communication, and they're pretty good with it. But I think more often than not, most people out there don't have that kind of timing. So we can slip very easily into getting horses that are a little, can be over threshold, and they can be worrying about things, and we don't bring the same clarity to the training, I think, with traditional training as we do with the positive reinforcement training. And that's because of the use of the bridge signal. So it really, and really what we strive for with the positive reinforcement is we want to teach them to be good problem solvers. So when we go, and in the beginning, it is all about the food, and they're like going, oh, I don't know what to do, but I sure do want that food. And then as we go along, we fade kind of the food isn't the most important thing. Now, is the food still a part of it? Yes, I still use food. I may not use food with that behavior anymore because that behavior's moved and known and understood. Now I'm moving on to something else and another thing and then another thing until they have a whole repertoire of behaviors that we faded the food from, but I still will have food on me. And I think that is, it's an important part. It's not necessary. It's not entitlement about the food. But I think when we do that, we start to, well, okay, let me backtrack here for a little bit. There was a study that was done in the late 60s where they gave animals free food. Then they took that food away and taught them to hit a lever for the food. And then they gave them both options back. And what do you think they did? Of course, well, not of course, but they tend to ignore the free food and go to the lever for food. Now, it is something that people don't quite understand or know how that, they think it's going to always be about the food. When it is done in a systematic way, when it's done correctly, it is not all about the food. It's about the game that was proven over and over again. They repeated that experiment with different animals in different situations. And what we've learned is that they actually like to play the game. So there's something in us too that likes to play the game. I love to do crossword puzzles. And there's nobody feeds me for that or pays me for that, but I love to do it. A lot of us like to play games or competitions or things that there's this kind of little bit of a struggle in there. And that is basically came from that study called contra freeloading, that it wasn't all about the food if it's done correctly. If you feel like your horse is doing it only for the food, in the early stages, like I said, that's what it's about. But then as we start going, we start making it more about the game, and we teach them to be good problem solvers. So they enjoy the problem solving, and you'll see them very quickly. They start going, yeah, I see the food, but I want to do the thing, and they start shifting to that place. So when they become, but a horse who's been told, no, you're doing it wrong. No, you're doing it wrong. No, you're doing it wrong, has a tendency to think that I don't want to do anything. I just want to know, the answer. And they can be quite insecure about being free thinkers. It makes them a little worried. So it's a little bit of a process to open them up and get them to trust. But when you have a horse who is working with you, and I think this is a great example. When Minty was first learning to collect. So now he's a thoroughbred being ridden by me, who's been at that point riding a few years, I had been riding all that long, and it was like, okay, well, now it's time to teach the concept of collection. It takes a long time for the muscles to really develop into that. So we weren't going to get, duration with it. But I remember Vinton, my ex-husband, was a Grand Prix show jumper, saying, this can be really frustrating for horses. It can create a lot of anxiousness. And so we said, okay. And, I said, okay, can you go forward? Can you come back? In the most rudimentary way, you could see him processing it, and they just lifted his back up a little bit, and we just clicked, and said, yes, that's what we're looking for. So he was the problem solver in there. I didn't have to keep going until he is doing something and he doesn't know what. He gave me the littlest thing, and I could say, yes, that's a piece. So he already had, a positive reinforcement history with both of those pieces. So now when you have a horse like that, who is always thinking, there's an answer in here somewhere, and I'm going to figure out what it is. And they're not hasty. They're not worried. They're not frantic. That's just amazing. And so I think the whole process tends to build in the beginning. You got to go slow and build that foundation. And I always say, go slow, go slow, you'll go faster in the long run. But in the long run, it is a horse who snap, 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 because they're thinking through it so quickly. But I think with it comes a lot of confidence. It comes a lot of curiosity. It creates it emboldens the horses. It changes. There's a study being done like up in the Northwest. My friend, Dr. Robin Foster, was helping her students do it. And it was about perspective. And what they find, again, because horses tend to be neophobic, they tend to see things and think bad, scary, fearful. when with positive, so the perspective is on the negative side. I try not to use negative because it's not the subtraction side, it's on the fearful side. And then with positive reinforcement, they tend to have a more optimistic perspective, so that they tend to look at things instead of going, oh no, it's fearful, what could it possibly be? They're like, what is that? And so the byproduct is a horse who tends to be less spooky, they're more focused, they're more relaxed, they're definitely more connected, in a better partnership. So the outcome is, and it all sounds so, it sounds so good, too good to be true. And sometimes I don't even talk about it. I just try to get people to experience it for themselves. And once they do, then they're like, I've even had Olympic riders, because I've worked with Olympic and international competitors in all different disciplines, saying to me, I thought I had a good relationship before, but it's almost like a little light went on and now we are bonded even stronger. So I think that is something, when people experience it, it's phenomenal when you see how quickly you can turn things around, and how much you can build their trust and their confidence in your relationship. It's beyond words to me, really, but it's pretty remarkable.
Yes, for sure. That's definitely one of the things I love personally about positive reinforcement, is how it can make that change, and also how it can create the person to become reinforcing.
Yes.
Over time. So
yes, exactly. We actually become conditioned reinforcers. They just see us and they're like, oh, my human's here. And that means they look at us and they're like endorphins and dopamines, but they just feel good. They're flooded with good feelings because here we come, because we've been associated with it. So it's, exactly.
Yes. All right. I'll ask one more question and then we're going to take a little bit of a break and let anyone in here ask any questions, and then we'll continue on with more of mine.
Okay.
But in what ways, if any, have you seen the equestrian community change with more positive reinforcement training?
Oh, it's changed in some pockets. It's changed a lot. But there's, I think every discipline has their stronger and their weaker, in everywhere, people go, oh no, those dressage people, oh no, those jumper, but they're all full of good and bad in there. But I think in pockets, it's taken hold more. And I feel like I think with your recreational horse owner and rider, it has taken hold much more than it has in the show world. So I think the show world is kind of our next frontier that we're all really working at, as you are too, to try to get the awareness out there. And so it has been, it's getting there, so really there's so much more, and people are doing things with the cooperative care and figuring out how to use it in your recreational circles. But now we're getting it back to where I started, and trying to take it to the higher levels and getting people more aware of how to use it in those ways. So it's, and I think also another thing, and I think this kind of dovetails with social media. I think the social media aspect of the horse world, social media is kind of holding people a little more accountable, so there's a bigger awareness about welfare and lack of welfare. We've all seen things that have been in the news in the past, 2 or 3 years about, Olympic situations or international competitors, or, we've seen all these things and these dark things, and we're like, oh, that's horrible. Well, the general public doesn't know that all horse people don't do that, for one thing. So I think we got to be careful and be sure that we're doing the best we can for the horses and showing that we're considering it. But I feel like there's a bigger push now for considering the welfare of the horse and or all animals, and kind of getting to a more thoughtful, I think, approach about how to do things. And now, for many years, we didn't have any way to do it but how we've always done it, as an industry. And I think now that people are becoming more aware of positive reinforcement, it helps people to become more aware that there is another way to do it. There's that Maya Angelou quote that said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, I'm going to butcher it all up, but basically says, we do the best we can. And when we know better, we'll do better. And I think that is really kind of what we're getting with the positive reinforcement entering the horse world and getting more understood. Because if people don't, if there's people like, no, I will never do that. And you're like, and I know one of two things. One, they either don't really know what it is because it's science. I didn't make this up. This isn't my thing. This is just science. And it wasn't like somebody invented it. It was discovered. It's already going on. So I realized, one, they don't really understand what it is, or two, they've seen it done poorly. Because people, if they don't know quite enough how to do it, they can get themselves into a bind. So that's what I love about people like you being out there and trying to help people get it right. So I think that there are some people that have kind of resisted it, but I see more and more people are starting to learn more about it and what it truly is, and they tinker in it a little bit, and they can start to learn more about it. So I think that's kind of how it's changed. Is it's starting to be a little bit more accepted to a certain degree. But you know what? There's this horse expo in Harrisburg. It was in March, and I heard 4 people on microphone saying how feeding their horse, clicker training, positive reinforcement. Well, they didn't say positive reinforcement because a lot of people will kind of claim that without being actually really, they just use the words, but they'll say clicker training's bad. This is what you get if you feed your horse. So I heard 4 people basically bashing positive reinforcement, as a technical way to do it. Now, there's a lot of people that hear that and think, oh, that's bad. But you know what? When I was doing expos long ago, nobody bothered to, and I was out there with all those big people, and I was friends with them, and I was there every time. They knew me. We were all together, and nobody bashed it then. So it tells me that now we're becoming more of a force to be reckoned with. So now it's becoming more formidable, now people have to kind of address it because it's becoming more and more coming into their world a little bit. So it definitely is growing.
Yes, for sure. All right, so I know there's a question in the chat, but if anyone else has any questions at this time, you can unmute or put it in the chat. But Linda says, I'd like to hear more about when to fade out the food and how.
Okay, and that's a really good question. And it's, I wish there was just a recipe. I could go, what you do is 42 repetitions, but it's not quite like that. So I think this is a really kind of under talked about thing that I think is really, really, really important to me. And I know it was really big with the marine mammals. And that's something called classic conditioning. So the classic conditioning is also called Pavlovian conditioning. And that is something that just happens with repetition. So Pavlov, if you guys remember, Pavlov had to collect saliva from dogs. So as he was going to collect the saliva, the way he'd get them to drool was he opened brought food in. I don't know if it was a can, I don't know what. He brought food in, and there was a sound that happened right before the food was introduced. So the food would be produced, and they'd all start drooling. He'd collect the saliva, and then he'd feed them. And so one day he did the sound, and he didn't have the food. He didn't know he had the food, didn't have the food. And the dogs all started drooling, but there was no food. So he realized, wait, this sound that meant nothing got paired with food. And now without the food, this sound produces the physical reaction that the food did. And that means endorphins and dopamines. He didn't know all that thing because neuroscience wasn't where it was now, but it means endorphins, dopamines, and all the things that the food indicates. Well, that's classic conditioning. It's just a pairing of the two things. So we start off, so there's operant conditioning. Oh, you're getting geeky behavior talk now, Linda. So hang on. But so now we have operant conditioning is us teaching them how to do things. We're saying you do this, you get this happens, and we're teaching them how to function and get those things. The other part is classic conditioning. And this is the repetition that happens. And this was really big with Minty. Minty, all of his behaviors were built through positive reinforcement. So he had a very strong reinforcement history with all of them being mounted. Trot, walk on, slow down, go, trot, canter, all those things had a super strong positive reinforcement history. This means they'd actually become classically conditioned over time. So I would ask for Canada part. He's like, I love Canada part. Why wouldn't I do a Canada part? He didn't think you owe me food for this. He just thought, I just love it. It makes me feel good. So if this is really kind of where the classic conditioning, when we get things classically conditioned, when we've done the repetition and it's been paired enough with a primary reinforcement, pretty soon they love the behavior. They like it. They know it. But there's a little systematic approach in there that I do from the beginning that I think is kind of a key in there. I'm raising the criteria all the time. So it's until it's complete. So from the very moment we say, keep your head to yourself. So don't be pushy about food, keep your head over there. And like, oh, okay, I get it. And then I start raising criteria. I raise it small enough that they have huge success with it. So they're like, I'm good at this. But it's not just the same behavior. I'm going to go back to that analogy of me liking crossword puzzles. I love crossword puzzles. And if the Sunday or the New York Times is progressive, Monday is the simpler puzzle, and it gets progressively harder till Sunday. It's a beast. I can barely even do it. So I can't do it typically. I have to cheat. I have to go look up the answers and put them in and get thesauruses out. But I love doing the crossword puzzles. That's just one of the things I love to do. But if you gave me the same exact crossword puzzle every single day, I would just fill it in and be like, you would take the joy out of it for me. I wouldn't try. And let's say you said, I'm going to pay $5 every time you solve a crossword puzzle. And now I do them anyway, because I like the crossword puzzles, but I'll take the $5. I would just be like, I would do it. And I'd be like, give me my $5. I'd do it. Give me my $5. I wouldn't have joy. I wouldn't struggle through it. I wouldn't be excited that it came up. But the way it goes, it's just a little harder, a little each day. I keep doing it. And on Sunday, I don't get it. I mean, I might get 2 words and I can't even check them because there's no crossing on this, I could just fill in anything, but I still love to do it and I still try. So now I look at that as me raising criteria. If I keep it the same exact place the whole time, it's not very fun. I've taken the game out of the game, and the game is really important. So I'm going to, but if I go right to Sunday, I'm going to be like, if it's always Sunday, I'm going to be like, I can never do this. It's kind of futile, and that won't be very fun either. So in there, I got to figure out, how do I raise a criteria just a little bit? Maybe we just do it 2 feet in a different area. Maybe I just look for a little tiny bit more, a little tiny bit longer, but they start learning. That's part of engaging them in the game, so that they start going, ooh, I get it. Ooh, I get it. But as we continue with that, so now they learn to be good problem solvers, because this is going to be a part of that process. And so they start realizing, ooh, I'm going to look for the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. But it also, then we start building duration on those behaviors. So I don't just go, we did it, the same crossword puzzle for 2 months and now, or 2 weeks even, same exact crossword puzzle. And now I'm just not going to feed you. I start saying, okay, let's do 2 crossword puzzles, or let's do 2 extra answers, or 4 extra answers, and 10 extra answers, and then 2 crossword puzzles, and then 4 crossword puzzles. So I'm building duration on it. So I don't just drop off from there, but I'm raising the criteria now, shifting to more duration or maybe more performance. But all those pieces, we want to start kind of helping them to be engaged in the game. But through that process, that classic conditioning isn't stopping. So one of the things, if you ever watch me work, I feed a ton. I am one of the most heavy-handed feeders you will find. And there's a reason for that. I want to get to classic conditioning as quickly as I can. I want them to think, man, I am the best problem solver, so that when we have new things come, they're like, I get it. I'm gonna try something, so there's this balance as we start to do that. And I build with the more reinforcement, the more success, and the bigger chunks we go, the quicker I'm going to get to that classic conditioning and having them enjoy it and like it. So, but there's also a little catch in here. I also need to work on relaxation from the get-go because they start loving this. It's like the best part of their day. So I don't want to get them so frantic about it. So I build relaxation in from the early stages, but I also continue using a lot of food for relaxation, then shifting to more raising the criteria. So it's a little, as much as this is science, it is art. And I want you guys that are listening and interested in this to hang on and know that what you've been learning about your horses all along, that's the art. Do not throw that away. Do not discount it. Listen to your gut sometimes and go, you know what? I never saw anybody do this. I'm going to try this, so you got to try those things. And every horse is different. So I can't say it's always this. It's like, I have to figure out, I go, okay, I'm working with a new horse or new behavior with a horse I know, but as I go along, sometimes I go, oh, that's too much. I better slow down. And I was raising the criteria too fast, or I'm not raising it enough, so it's very arty in this whole process. And that's one of the things I got so good at with SeaWorld. But then the horses have really helped me hone that skill. So it is that systematic approach, but really to start to fade the food, classic conditioning, I'm counting on a lot, building that criteria, building that duration. So instead of just dropping off, I go, okay, well, now that we've done 1 canter stride, now we'll do 4 canter strides and, do that for a bit. So that's pretty solid. And then 8, and then 12, and then 20, and then a canter to a downward transition to the other canter depart. Now I'll bridge that piece. So it's building the chain of behaviors and strengthening all those behaviors in between. So I hope that helps. That there's a million behaviors. So sometimes it's hard to picture them all, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah. I think that was great. Linda also said if we could talk about how the target could be used to play the game.
Yes. Okay. So with the target, and I kind of realized the other day, I said to Jessie, and Jessie's who I work with, we do training with, and, she's doing the positive reinforcement. She's fabulous. And so I was saying to Jessie the other day, I think we need to put little explanations what the targets are, and what the different tools are and how they work, because this is one that I use the target. So the target, how I look at it is, with the marine mammals, we had no halters and lead ropes. So how are you going to get them to do anything? The target was used for everything, whether it's a fast swim, a high jump, a pectoral, looking for their pectoral flippers, whatever it is. We build and build and build. So it becomes a way, the target is used to create behavior. So it's not to be a crutch that's there forever. The target is really to begin to create the behavior. So if I think I want my horse to go in the trailer, and I prefer, if I can, to teach this stuff at Liberty with no equipment. Equipment will come later when I know that they know the behavior, they like the behavior, they understand the criteria, they're showing that they want to do it. Then I start thinking, okay, now that you can do the reverse round pen, they go around, they'll do their transitions and they can run off anywhere, and they're doing that well. Then I start thinking, okay, well, now I might introduce the halter. Now I might introduce the lunge line, so that I can teach them how to be lunged in, at a show or whatever, but I want to teach them first without the equipment. So utilizing the target is a great way to begin a lot of behaviors, so that I can get them. So if they think I hate the trailer, and I'm thinking, but I'm going to teach you trailer loading. And if you're at Liberty, you're probably not going to get anywhere near the trailer. So I could use a target, say, can you just take a step towards the trailer? And as they go, yes, I can click and reinforce it. So the target can create the behavior of getting closer to the trailer. The target can create the behavior of lowering their head. So if I have a horse that tends to go kind of hollowed out and high, and I want them to change their frame a little bit, if I have targets and cones, as they start to look for the cones, they're going to change their head carriage. So, or maybe I want them higher, then I might put it up higher. Or if I have a horse who won't go forward, I might have a cone with a target in it, and I'm going to ask the horse to go to that target, teach him to do it, and first get the concept, and then I'm going to keep clicking the walking, because what I want to see more of is walking. So the point of the clicker is to be able to say, yes, what you're doing right now, I want to see more of. So it's a way that we can draw attention to that behavior, but the target is to get the behavior to happen, because if the behavior isn't happening, I can't click it and I can't reinforce it, which means I'm not going to happen more. So I need to create it somehow. So that's really the target's role. But let's say somebody comes to me and they say, I'm having a problem with my flying lead changes. Okay. Well, and they have lead changes, but they're, they just, it's a point where it's not really going to need the target. We're just going to need some timing in there and capturing the part that we're looking for. But I will still teach the target, because when we first teach them the clicker, we're teaching them just keep their head to themselves, keep their head to themselves. It's their introduction to the training, because we need to get them kind of invested in the training period. So that when we go, we're going to play your favorite game, we're playing positive reinforcement game, we want them going, okay, I'm ready. So the target can be a tool to create the behavior, but I still, what I find is when we've just taught them to keep their head away, the target in its most simplistic way has just made it a little bit more challenging. So now we're saying, I want you to do something. Now I want you to find the target. You can find it over here. Can you find it there? Can you find it up here? Can you find it down there? So we've just made the game a little bit more complicated. We've raised the criteria, so we've made it now, we've taken them to the next stage of problem solving. So the target is literally used for all sorts of things, whether it's loading in a trailer or lowering your head or stopping or going, movement under saddle. It is also very important because it's a concept and a tool that can be utilized in more ways than you'll even think about, like we can teach them to station on it for mounting or for injections or for, a million things. I hope that helps, Linda. Yeah.
All right. I have one last question before we have to wrap things up.
Okay.
But what are some common misconceptions about clicker training or positive reinforcement?
Okay. And I think that's a great question. One is that it's all about the food, and people thinking that they'll only do it for the food. It can be done poorly. So I have to give it that. There are people that have taught their horses to only do it for the food. Tom Dorrance, and honestly, he was one of those people because he saw, okay, I get it, but I can't just always do it for food. You know what I mean? So I think one, that they're only doing it for the food. That is a common misconception. And when it's done in a systematic approach, we actually get beyond that and we can fade the food. So I think that's one of the things that it's going to cause problem behaviors, because that's another thing. I think a lot of people think that it causes mouthiness and biting, and it can, again, if we're not aware of what we're doing when we're feeding our horses. Because like I said, every single time we feed a horse, we are reinforcing some behavior. So to stop and think, what are you doing right now? As I go bring you the food, I'm reinforcing whatever's happening. And if it's pounding on the stall door, well, go see that again, or whatever it might be. But so I think that people thinking that's the problem, it's not really it only shows, it highlights how powerful the food is, but it's our lack of the correlation, us understanding the correlation. I've worked with aggressive, mouthy, bitey horses, and I mean like deadly aggressive horses. And I've worked with them utilizing positive reinforcement to cure, to address their mouthiness and biting issues. So it's not really, and that's through hand feeding. So it's not really the food that is the challenge. It's understanding, the correlation. What would be other misconceptions? There's a lot of them. And I think that another one is saying that they're only doing it for the food, which we talked about how we fade the food so that doesn't, they're doing it for the game more than the food if we've done it correctly. But really, if you think about it, what is in it for your horse to do a flying lead change? There's not through traditional training. With positive reinforcement, we start putting we put something in that they value, that they like. And that really is the game changer, particularly when it comes to competition. But I think the other thing with that is that there was a study, it was another neurobiologist, and his name was Robert Sapolsky. His name is, it's still that. And he teaches at Stanford. And he actually has a neurobiology, like his intro course, I think it's online, like on YouTube, that people pay to take at Stanford. You can see it. But he has this one, it's called Dopamine Jackpot. And it is just a little, 5-minute thing he talks about. And Jessie, I had her watch it. And she said, oh, he's a funny scientist. And he is funny. But what he does, he talks about, so what they did, they taught these monkeys to when the light came on, they hit a lever, and then here came food came. So this behavior was 100% trained, very consistently done. And then what they started doing is changing that schedule of reinforcement. So now they started reinforcing it 50% of the time. They found when they reinforced it 50% of the time, it was, when the dopamine went through the roof. And so the timing was really important in there. But the part I really kind of wanted to get to is people really thought the dopamine was escalating when they got the food. And then others said, no, I think it's probably when they do the behavior. But actually, the dopamine, when it got released, when the light came on, when the opportunity for reinforcement happened. And I think that's pretty significant because it shows, again, it reinforces that it's the game, it's the process. And so I think when we understand more about that and do it in a systematic way, because that's another thing that's important, we can really utilize that and help them to be, fulfilled. And it's enrichment. It really is environmental enrichment. And it just makes them happier horses who get something out of it. So that's all I got.
That's all right. All right. I think that is all we have time for, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you coming on and getting to talk. And well, this is recorded, so we'll have this uploaded and other people can watch. But thank you for being here and sharing.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, everybody. And thank you, Linda, for joining us and keeping up your work with Merlin. All right. And thank you, Amelia. Thank you for inviting me. I think this has been fabulous. It's always nice to see your face, and I look forward to seeing you soon, because I will be.
Yes. Very excited.